This is the mission history for the second week of September, as told by Pastor James Huang. So we're going to take a trip back in time to 19th century Korea, a place with some incredibly strict social rules. And we're going to explore how one person's single act of compassion didn't just save one life, it completely changed the future for an entire community.
All right, so our story really kicks off with the guy who started it all, an American missionary by the name of Samuel Moore.
So Moore, he graduated from McCormick Seminary, which, was a real training ground for a lot of the first missionaries to Korea. He was sent by the Northern Presbyterian Church, and he shows up in Joseon in September of 1892. And he did not waste any time, let me tell you. By that very winter, he'd already started a school for a handful of orphans in a Seoul neighborhood called Gondang-gol. And just a year later, he founded the Gondang-gol Church.
Okay, and this is where things get really interesting. To get just how big of a deal this was, you've got to understand the kind of world Moore was living in. We're talking about a society with social rules that were basically set in stone.
Just look at this social divide. It was massive. On one hand, you've got the Yongban. They're the ruling class, the nobility. And on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have the Bakchong. This was the outcast class, which included people like butchers. They were seen as unclean, literally untouchable. They had to live in totally separate communities. The gap between these two groups wasn't just big, it was a canyon.
So, in Moore's brand new church, there was a man named Park Song-chun. He was a butcher, a Baekjong. And then one day, word gets around that Park is incredibly sick. We're talking a high fever, and he's basically on his deathbed.
So what Missionary Moore decides to do next? Well, by the standards of that time, it was completely unthinkable. This quote really nails it. It gives you a sense of the shockwaves this sent out. So you're probably asking, what did he do?
He didn't just, send some medicine and hope for the best. No way. Moore went out and got Dr. Avison. Now, Dr. Avison wasn't just some local doctor. He was the personal physician to the king, King Gojong himself. So Moore brings the king's top doctor into the home of an outcast, a butcher. And Dr. Avison treats Park Song-chun, and he saves his life. Just incredible.
Now you'd think saving a man's life is a good thing, no questions asked, right? Well, in a society this rigid, that one act of love ended up creating a huge problem. It actually split the very church that Moore had just built from the ground up.
For Park Sung-chun, it changed everything. He gets baptized in 1894 and becomes this incredibly passionate, devoted member of the church. And his story was so powerful that other people started to notice. A lot of other commoners and outcasts started showing up at the Gondang-gol Church because of him.
But for the noble Yangban members, this was a bridge too far. The very idea of sitting in church, worshiping next to a butcher, someone they truly believed was beneath them, it was just unacceptable. And so they left. They just walked right out.
And they didn't just disappear. Nope. On April 20th, 1894, these Yongbon members went and started their own church, the Hongmoondong Church, just down the road. So now, that deep social divide was a real physical thing. You could literally see it on a map of the local Christian community.
So now you've got this split. And it seems impossible, right? How do you heal a wound that deep? But then, a completely unexpected disaster strikes. And that disaster, strangely enough, is what paves the way for everyone to come back together, and it leads to an even crazier chapter in Park Song-chun's story.
So you gotta wonder, what could possibly be big enough to bring these two groups back together? To bridge that huge gap between the nobles and the outcasts. What could make them even talk to each other again?
One word, fire. The Gondang-gol Church building, the church of the commoners and outcasts, it burned completely to the ground. And out of that tragedy came this totally unexpected opportunity. It's what finally forced these two separate groups to deal with each other.
And what about Park Sung-chun, the man who started this whole thing? Well, his journey is just mind-blowing. The guy who was once a dying outcast, he becomes a pillar of the community. And get this, by 1911, he's named a church elder. That's a position of huge respect, a role that was absolutely 100% unthinkable for a Bakjung before this.
But if you think that's the end of the story, you're wrong. The legacy here is maybe the most incredible part. The impact went beyond just Park Song-chun. His son, Park So-ha-young, ends up going to Severance Medical School. Yeah, the same place whose director saved his dad's life. And in 1908, he becomes a doctor in its very first graduating class. Just let that sink in for a second. The son of an untouchable butcher became a doctor. That's a total transformation.
So that brings us back to the man who kicked this whole thing off, Missionary Moore. His story really comes full circle, and it's completely defined by the people he dedicated his life to serving.
You know, Moore came to be known as an apostle to the oppressed. He poured his entire life into helping the poor, the marginalized. He showed a kind of love that just didn't see social barriers. And the tragic part is that while he was caring for the sick, he caught typhus himself. He passed away in 1906. He literally lived and died for the people he served.
So this story comes to us from Pastor James Huang. He's a researcher of Korean mission history who actually served as a missionary in China and now has a ministry in Maryland in the U.S. He shares these amazing histories every week from his book, Remember and Repay, 52 Weeks of Mission Meditation.